Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So, I think there's a few different ways that we can engage this conversation and to look at it in the prism of what you all are talking about. Because the idea is kind of all rooted together, right? And what Tariq is saying in terms of how do you deal with an absence of success, and Shamina, what you're talking about in terms of trying to figure out what does something look like down the line, right? Reflection in and of itself is an interesting kind of process. In Arabic, the word for reflection is fikr, right? And when you're doing it, you can do it in the present. You can do it in retrospect. And you can do it with kind of foresight. And these three things have a relationship to each other, but they're also things that can be done independent of one another. So for example, if somebody has a trajectory that's outlined and it's, what are you studying?
I haven't declared, but I'm going for international relations.
What did you fail?
Probably comp sci.
Comp sci?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So you've failed comp sci. And let's hope, inshallah, I did not fail comp sci. But in getting to a place now where one says, what does that disrupt? If you're trying to think about yourself as an individual that exists in this moment, but it creates now a sense of anxiety, because what you started with was, I didn't do well on an exam, but where your thoughts ended were, how do I tell my family? Those are two very different scenarios. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? And so in us trying to think out, well, I'm here in the moment, and it creates now a challenge that there's a bad grade, there's parents, and then it attaches itself here, but it's not being done productively. It's being done in a state of anxiety. It's not done in a mode of empowerment. There's a lot of different things that can interject, and it's not then reflection. It's being done now through this negative prism with stress, and that's more rumination than reflection. It makes it hard then to draw meaning from things like failures or mistakes. You get to a space where it's just now about immediacy of kind of feeling whole. Do you see what I mean? Do you? Mm-hmm. What am I saying?
You're saying, well, you're kind of describing my feeling in like an academic way.
It's weird that happens, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Every time you ask me to repeat what you say, I never repeat what you say right.
Why? No, that's
Remember
great.
last time you're like, oh, what did I just say? It's like always under pressure. Yeah, I started sweating.
So what happens here is that you start sweating? Yeah. My goodness. So what happens here is that this is all being done by you. And it's very easy for us to get to a space now where there's not necessarily meaning in these situations, because you're not devoid of an answer, but the question that you're asking isn't what it is that you're looking for, right? So how do I deal with a bad grade is very different from how do I tell my parents I got a bad grade, because I might be able to cope with it, but there's other complexities that get in the way. And that's what reflection can help with. But the states that you're in when you're in that mode of reflection is what becomes critical to understand. right? If you're applying this to say, how do I deal with this in terms of, my future professional endeavors? I was on the phone with someone today who is successful medical practitioner, doctor, doing well in that regard, doesn't have a life partner, and is in a space now where there's a lot of disarray in that sense. How do I move forward when I'm in this space that there's external variables causing inward agitation? Do you get the question, right? And to think out now, there's real life implications, but I'm rooting it and compounding it in a specific frame. And it's not letting me understand what are the other things that are creating difficulty for me. What are the other things that are creating anxiety for me, right? So do you find just a sense of real energy in the sense of I could be whatever I want to be, so to speak? Or does it create kind of suffocation and restriction, right? And which one do you feel? And it's not that those are the only things you could feel, but like, what do you feel when you explore this idea of what am I going to experience tomorrow? Or when you're thinking about how do I tell my parents, like what's going on inside? Do you get what I'm saying? What's happening within you when you're thinking about that?
Usually, I don't know, I deal with test anxiety or stress anxiety in general. So whenever I think of like, okay, I did bad on this, that means for the rest of the exams I do, I'll do really bad also. And that just elevates the anxiety. And it's like, it's hard to express, like everything is crammed in one spot. It's just like, it's in my head all the time until like there's a change or something.
And what does that change?
Or like, okay, or like the next exam I do much better than expected. Or like, it's like I failed this exam, then I do totally the opposite, like a perfect score on the next exam. Then it relieves the stress, but then there's still the sense in the back that, oh, I still failed that exam. So that means I'm not perfect. You know what I mean?
I do. Yeah. What are you writing down?
Just questions.
What is the question you're writing?
I was writing down what is success, because you were talking about success.
Yeah.
And I think that has to do with some of my anxieties for sometimes, because I don't know, because I value the different aspects of success to me, or I don't know what success is. Like, is it recognition in money?
But why do you need to know the answer to that right now?
I don't, but it's something that's on my mind because while I'm figuring out my career, I think those two things are like inseparable, like the two concepts of like career and success.
Okay. So so if you have a link between these two things, right? You're already now creating for yourself cognitively a relationship if career equals success, right? This is what you're telling yourself. Like I was on the phone with somebody who's brilliant, amazing at this, but in her head, marriage equals success. And she has all of this down, like, great, but she doesn't have this. So in her head, it's not that this equals this, but only this equals this. Do you see?
Mm-hmm.
And it now becomes an impediment to how she sees herself, right? In your head, it's, grades equals success. Do you see the challenge here? Right? Because we can put anything here. Friends equals success. I don't even know how to write success. A lot of C's and a lot of S's in there. Right? Followers equals success. Right? A house equals success. What is the basis of all of this? Like, who's determining that this is what success is? Because when this becomes success, absolutely, it's also then giving us a definition of what failure is, right? So how are you coming to a place of determining that this is what success looks like? And these are the variables that determine what success are. Do you get what I'm saying? In our tradition, success isn't oriented towards the acquisition of a house or good grades or marriage or career or friends or followers. The Prophet ﷺ was a shepherd. In the Sunni tradition, he doesn't know how to read or write. His house is so small that when he prays in his house, he's essentially bumping up against his wife. From the standpoint of what we determine success to be is going to now build you up to either say this is what means failure or this is what means something else. Do you get what I'm saying? And so what Islam offers is a distinct structure that doesn't root now all of this as an absolute success. It says that this is just a part of this world. And the basis of it being a metric of success is not through the prism of societal acceptance, but what renders success is something that is much bigger or deeper than just a worldly existence. Do you get what I mean? And it's a very different paradigm than what those who instill this in our head make us believe that success is about. Do you get what I mean? I'm not going to ask you what you think because I don't want you to perspire. But what am I saying? Somebody tell me what I'm saying. If you don't know where this came from, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, right? Life is full of paradoxes. Do we know what a paradox is? The word paradox, what it means? What is a paradox?
It's like
Man, you can't use big words to define other big words. Wait, all right, I don't want to talk to you anymore. What's a paradox? Somebody else tell me.
it contradicts itself.
Yeah, right. It contradicts itself. You're right. I'm just messing around. It's a phrase that is valid, but seemingly like contradicts itself, right? And so a paradox is, one of a paradox that we can attribute to this is that when you don't make a choice, you've essentially still made a choice. Because you're now choosing to do something, but not necessarily choosing to do it consciously or deliberately, right? Like a lot of us, religiously as Muslims, we unconsciously choose a perspective of God. We might not be aware of it, but you believe God to be something unconsciously, and then that determines how you engage with religion. The God of the Quran, the God of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is a God that he seemingly had hope in and drew strength from and empowerment from. The God that a lot of Muslims believe in is a God that makes them walk on eggshells, or has them get stuck in a place where this is what success is. This is what renders me now success. Success also in this definition equates now to a place of happiness. Because that's what we're saying, right? Get good grades, get a job, get married, get a house. It's all in pursuit of this. What Islam as a tradition posits is that everybody's entitled to this, whether they have these things or not. So the determining factor as to why am I studying and why am I in a pursuit of grades is a very subjective intentionality that you bring. And the motivation can be, I am studying this so I don't piss off my parents, but then that's what you're doing. And you've told yourself success isn't that my family is happy with me. Success is that my parents don't yell at me for being like a delinquent, right? That's not a good definition of success. It's a bad definition of success. Do you get what I mean? So we got to first create and construct a definition that says, well, what does this mean? Right? In a way that's empowering. When we have spiritual vehicles in our tradition, I'll give you an example of what I mean. What does the word tawbah mean? Huh? Repentance, yeah. And also to return. When you think of tawbah, like, what does it make you think of? Like when people tell you to make tawbah, how do they make you feel? Yeah, or anybody. What do you feel like when you're thinking about doing tawbah? Okay, but do you feel good? You feel guilt? Yeah. Remorse? Huh?
But I feel hopeful.
You feel hopeful? Great. Why do you feel hopeful?
Because it's like, well, in my head, I think of God as my friend. So it's like, I can just, if I did something, like, that's a friend I can tell who's not going to judge me.
There you go. So why do you feel remorse and guilt?
You should be sad for what you've done wrong, but you can also be hopeful while being sad.
It's an act that's supposed to get us to a place, right? You just said it's about going back to God. So if I'm here and this is taking me now to God, the end result should be that I feel spiritually uplifted, not like spiritually obliterated, right? The guilt or remorse could come prior to as a place of recognition, but as a vehicle, it's a spiritual vehicle. But when people on the minbar are constantly saying like, this haram, that's haram, you're going to hell, all of this stuff. When parents like tell you that things are haram that are not haram, or they tell you that like, you're a bad Muslim, everything comes into a prism now that this isn't about like increased spirituality. It's about me not getting to a place of just dealing with this guilt in a healthy way, right? But the connotation to it comes from, again, this paradox. We're going to have a definition that is actual rather than what it is that we perceive it or rhetorically believe it to be. And you want to get it to be oriented here, right? So that it's an uplifting tool. Similarly, we want to get to a place where we have a definition of what this is so that we can then understand what it's not. Do you know what I mean? And we're juxtaposing this now in a way that it has a symbiotic relationship with the other end of the spectrum, which is failure. Would any of you tell Tariq that he is a failure because he did bad on his exam? Did he tell you that?
He does. I
Listen.
have never ever told him that. I don't know where he's getting.
But in all seriousness, would you say to him, if he walked in here and he was like, I just failed my comp sci exam, would you be like, man, ain't nobody gonna marry you? You better look into adoption because, huh?
There's no problem there.
But do you get what I'm saying, right? You're gonna be giving him now probably more empathy, right? You're not gonna laugh at him or mock him or these kinds of things. You're not gonna make him believe that he's devoid of success because of one exam that didn't go a certain way. You gotta like rework, yeah, your own construct around this, right?
If my friend comes in and says that they didn't have a great exam, I'll probably tell them that it's okay, it's all right. And I generally mean that. But when it comes to your own self, you're like, no, dude, you're dumb. Like, how do you get out of this? Like, I generally feel like my friend is not a failure. But when it comes to yourself, you're like, no, you are a failure.
So how do you get out of it? You guys want to move up and be a part of the circle? You can be the cool guys that sit in the back of the room, but there's
I'm
not.
just in your dark.
Yeah. How do you deal with it? Right? We've all had feelings where we don't feel like we're doing well or we're not good enough. And it comes up at the wrong times. What can I do if I don't have somebody to lean on in that moment? How am I getting to a space? Do you see? What do we think?
What was your question?
Hafsa is asking, it's easy for me to pass out, cups of wisdom to others. But when I have to drink my own tea, I'm not good at that. I know how to tell other people how things will be okay, but I tell myself not introspection or kind of reflection. I give myself a lot of self-deprecation. So I'll tell Tariq, don't worry, man, even though you didn't do that well in school, somebody's going to eventually marry you, right? They'll feel bad for you, But do you get what I'm saying? But when it's me, it's like my life is over. I'm devastated here. How do I break that self-talk? How do I keep moving forward? Do you get what I'm saying? Because the goal is not to be indifferent, right? If you make a mistake and you do something wrong, you want to be able to recognize and acknowledge it, but in a healthy way that lets you still keep going. Do you know? As opposed to now being kind of shut down and paralyzed to say that there's no point to this anymore. What do you do to recenter yourself when your world is thrown off? If you all were here last week, we were talking about reclaiming spirituality, which I don't think any of you were in this room last week. Were you here? Yeah, with the grad students?
Yeah, but I came in late.
So remember when I talked to people and I said the two questions I ask people the most that I get the answer of I don't know is what are your values and how do you take care of your heart, right? So when your world is thrown off, what do you do to recenter yourself? Or what would you say? If somebody says, I'm good at telling people like other than myself that things are going to be okay, how do I do that for me? How do I talk myself down when I'm now kind of going all over the place? What would we tell people? And not like words, but strategies. Does the question make sense?
I think of certain ayahs in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that like things will be okay. For example, la tahzan inna Allah ma'ana. Don't be sad, Allah is with us. And then la yukallifu Allahu nafsan illa wus'aha. Allah is not going to put on a soul more than it can bear. And then just thinking about the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that as long as you ask me for forgiveness, I will forgive you. So it's not a conditional thing. It's like you will be forgiven. All you have to do is that.
Okay. What do you think about that? You be honest. Remember when you told me I was really old on my birthday? Yeah, bring out some of that honesty. You remember when she said that? Yeah.
Every word.
There you go.
No, this is the advice I'll give my friends. Like, think about your relationship with Allah. Think about this. Think about that. But it doesn't register at the time. It doesn't.
It doesn't. No.
Okay, so we're in the moment. You just got a bad grade, right? What does he do at that moment? He gets the exam. And we're trying to figure this out step by step. What does somebody do at that time? Because the alternative can build itself up, right? This person I'm on the phone with has for years in her head now said she didn't fit into those boxes of success. She's doing well. She's a great doctor, first doctor in her family, et cetera, got all those boxes checked off, but it's now turned into negatives. Maybe if I hadn't gone to med school, I would have gotten married early. Maybe if I didn't do this, this would have happened, that would have happened, right? What does someone do to be able to avoid the buildup of that talk? Because the goal is to not be absence of your humanity, right? Somebody loses a loved one is going to hurt. It would be more abnormal if somebody passed away that you were close to and you were like jumping up and down like nothing happened, right? But the recovery time for what is now kind of information that you absorb that can be unsettling, what do you do in those moments? Does the question make sense? So what do we do? How do I get to talk to myself in a more productive way, which is the base of this question, right? How do I create self-talk that is uplifting and empowering? How do you do that? You don't have to raise your hands. Okay.
Spoke before. But I mean, normally what I would do is I find like somewhere quiet and I like to be alone and just like think about like, everything that happened. And then yeah, of course you're gonna have like thoughts of like, okay, like this was so stupid, like I'm so stupid. But then like those things calm down as you think about it and like just like taking the time to be alone. And it helps a lot.
Okay. What else? Yeah.
For me, just doing anything that gets my mind off of it. Then once the anxiety is gone, just look back at it and see where I made the mistakes.
Anything else?
Eating also helps.
Alongside that, I'd say being with people that uplift you and spread that energy, and they don't take your negative energy and spread that.
Okay.
After one of the what really matters classes, when we talked about like naming feelings, it's like I tried it after like something went down, and it was like the weirdest. The only word that I can think of to describe it was release, and so I would recommend that. That was cool.
Naming the feelings.
Yeah,
You guys should all take that class.
yeah, you should.
It's a
Shameless
great
plug.
class.
I've done that before,
Done what?
naming your feelings,
Yeah.
and it does help a lot.
Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
Maybe gratitude.
Okay.
Forgiveness
Forgiveness of what?
yourself.
Okay.
Thanks.
Look at that.
Don't like.
No sweat.
Please.
She said last time I asked her a question, it made her sweat a lot. She got on the spot. Anything else? Anything else that comes to mind? There's no right or wrong answers here.
Like taking another day, like say like one day you might be feeling really emotional, but like the next day, like you might be less emotional, like think more in a different way about it. So like,
Yeah.
and also like a change in environment would also help how you think about the problem in a different way.
Great. Now, what's happening when we do these things? It's not an exhaustive list, but when you compare it to this other list that's here, this is what's going on inside, right? And we have in here also waswasa. You have within it the nafs, right? The lower self. You can have past experiences.
Don't want to call out every word he puts up there.
What is it?
He's like, I hate those. That's the word. Like,
That's the past experience.
But essentially what these things are doing are they're becoming now a means of not reacting to this, but regaining control of this. Because these things can be really heavy. And they're a part of us. They're not us in our entirety. And some things are external and they impact. So waswasa can impact your thoughts, right? There's a relationship there. And you can see how some of these things can now be strategically in relation to some of what's in this column. But all of this is going to pop up at that moment. And it's going to now be something that you either yield to or you simply acknowledge that that's what's going on. Why wouldn't your mind take you to a place that says, I just didn't do well on an exam. I'm not gonna like ever get into this school or grad school. My parents are gonna definitely like be upset with me. That's where your thoughts are going to take you. They're thoughts that are in their immediacy. Self-actualization, which is a big part of our religion, as you start to become more acquainted with you, and you recognize that all parts of you are good. You are a creature made in beauty, right? Tariq recited Surah Teen during Isha time. That's what it says. لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ. We created humans in the most beautiful of forms. It's a divine statement, right? Somebody's gonna ask you if you're beautiful. Like, yeah, I'm beautiful because God said he made me beautiful. So you're in this sphere now that says, these are the things that I'm combating. They're coming up. They're not externals, they're internals. They exist within you. So if you're not in a space where part of the definition of success can be material success, but if part of the definition of success does not incorporate a success of the inward, then things that happen to negate growth inwardly or to degrade and to diminish what's taking place inward, they're going to still happen, whether we're thinking about this simultaneously to outward or external success. You get what I'm saying? I like to write things down because I know that what's going on in my head is not always like easy to, it can be very abstract. So if it's not making sense, let me know that it's not making sense. So I'd rather that we distill certain concepts as opposed to kind of move over them, you know? And I say this to you because I don't know all of you as well as I know some of you. I really care about each one of you. So it's not going to do anything for me to stand here other than I want to make sure that it's helpful. And it's not helpful if you're just nodding when you shouldn't be nodding. When I ask you, does it make sense? Right? Okay. This list on this side of the board, you have to be able to come up with one for yourself. If you don't have something that enables you, that is not going to be, right? All of us are not Shu'aib. So he might do well in a place of solitude, right? I might go into a place where I'm alone and this just overtakes me. It doesn't mean that he's better than me, right? He is not better than me, right? But it also doesn't mean that I am worse than him or he is worse. We're just different people. We're fully autonomous. There's hadith where a companion comes to the Prophet, Ya Rasulullah, can I kiss my wife while I'm fasting? He says yes. Another comes, Ya Rasulullah, can I kiss my wife while I'm fasting? He says no. It's literally the same question. Yields a distinct answer, not because the question is different, but the person asking the question is different. They're coming with different realities. So the application of it is going to be distinct based off of the questioner. Do you get it? One was older, so there wasn't a concern that the kiss would lead to something that could invalidate the fast. For the younger person, it was maybe you should relax a little bit because that's not going to go in your favor. What's this list for you in the state that you're in right now? Because you are 18, 19 years old?
19.
19 years old, right? Don't worry, not 30 yet, so it's not a problem, right? When I turned 39, Pups asked me how old I was, and I said, I'm 39 years old. She's like, what? She's like, I can't even imagine being older than 30. I was like, thanks a lot. That's how I celebrated my birthday. You're in a constant state of flux, so you can't be in a state of movement if you're standing still. And sometimes we stand still, not because we're not living every day, but we're not open to knowing about ourselves, right? Naming feelings is a part of emotional intelligence. And another part of emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize that I don't know everything about me. that there's still room for me to learn more about who I am. So some of this is going to change as you just have evolution to yourself, which doesn't mean the starting point is that you're devoid of evolution, but evolution in the sense that you're going to keep growing. Like different things are going to happen in the course of your routines, your lives. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Can you please tell me what name of feeling is?
Naming a feeling, for example, if I asked you in this room, right, the 10, 12 of us, how are you feeling? And I said, just write it down. There's a good chance that all of us would pretty much name the same 6 or 7 emotions. But you're not just angry or sad or happy. When I teach this class that Raham takes, one of the things that I do to demonstrate this, right? There's about 31,000 emotions you can feel. And you're in the class too, right? And I show people a list, an encyclopedia of emojis, where there's literally like thousands of emojis, right? You could open up your phone and you can nuance your expression to a place where it's like a winky face with a smile and the tongue is out. And it just means a different feeling than the winky face with a smile, but the tongue is not out. If there's thousands of emojis that are built to express what you're feeling, that means that there's thousands of feelings that you're feeling. And self-talk is really, really important because you can convince yourself of anything. And some of these things, waswasa, the nafs, they want to get you to perceive other than what is actual. So they're going to impact your self-talk to get you to a place that it doesn't matter what is real, they're going to get you to just believe something, whether it's real or not. And in that, if you start telling yourself, I'm angry, but in reality, you're really sad. Or you're in a state of grief, but you're telling yourself that you're depressed. Or if you're actually in a place of depression, but you're telling yourself you're angry. Its application is going to be problematic. And you're not naming the feeling accurately. And it's going to then create kind of a trajectory off of a misnamed feeling. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that what you guys got from class?
Yeah, but also it was like trying to figure out what feeling to name was making me pay more attention. And so
Great.
I
I'm
felt
glad
like-
I'm glad you learned something.
I take notes and everything.
Oh my God. What were you gonna say? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I forgot what it was.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Language is the key here, right? You don't want to undermine that our tradition is an oral tradition rooted in a text that is called like the recitation, the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ is, in his own words, he says, blessed with a speech that's jawami in its nature, that he spoke concise statements, but every word had deep meaning to it, right? In the Adamic narrative of creation, the verse is there. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا. Adam was taught the names of everything. Everything is about deepening. And one of the ways to deepen is by knowing the names of things. So how can you call something by its name if you don't know the name in the first place? Do you get what I'm saying? And then there's ambiguity to it, right? Like if somebody said to me, tell me about like this Muslim girl. I'm like, what? But I could describe any of the 4 women who are in this room right now. If somebody said to me, what do you know about Riham? I now have specificity attached to her name. And now what her name means to me is distinct based off of my knowing of her. Do you understand? You can't know yourself if you're telling yourself that you are something that you're not. And then you have a gap in your own information, and then it becomes harder to apply back words to yourself because the challenge isn't in the language, but it's in the perception of your own self. You see what I'm saying? Meaning, like, if you try to tell yourself something to make yourself feel better, and you're saying that I'm, X thing, when in reality you're Y, the solution is not going to work because the starting point isn't necessarily
Oh, yeah,
understood.
that's like the goal thing we did, like what are your values, how you get here, and if you don't know your starting point, how are you gonna end up there?
Yeah, right? You get it? Other thoughts on this? Just want to be mindful of the time. Can you pull anything from this to apply it to your conversation with yourself on what do I want to do with my life? Right?
Mhm.
Yeah. And what are some of those things that you could pull for yourself? You-
Like defining success for myself.
Okay.
So before I decide, before I define success as like a specific career path or as one thing, I need to ask myself what is actually going to make me happy.
Yeah. What does success look like? I'm going to say it to you as your brother who loves you. As a Muslim, but also as a person, your definition of success, you want to try your best to incorporate something that has to do with other realms of existence. So what does your time in this world mean in terms of what does success look like in the grave? What does your time in this world mean in terms of a successful day of judgment? What does your time in this world mean in terms of a successful akhirah, right? May Allah make us all people of Jannah. But what does that mean? Like, what does it really mean, And creating for yourself now something that gives insight as you pursue this in terms of worldly success. So if I know that my pursuit of what is going to be worldly is going to take me away from other worldly excess, then why am I going to pursue what is only going to give me good here, but it's going to mess up my time when I'm in the barzakh, I'm going to be in the grave, right? So you don't want to turn towards impermissible means of livelihood, for example. You don't want to engage in an absence of ethics in your activism or entrepreneurship, even because it's not good to mistreat people, but you think about success in these different realms, right? So what does success look like when I'm talking in a worldly sense? I have an inward and an outward. These are things that exist in the context of this world here. So I can have a box of success for that. But what does success look like in terms of what's remaining for me, right? So you and I are already out of like the womb. We're already removed from the original starting point of our souls. We're not going back there as a starting point. We've already moved forward. So what lies ahead is what's called the barzakh. This is the intermediary realm. It's like the grave. You then have the day of judgment. And then you have the akhirah, the hereafter. What does a successful time in the grave look like for you? Right? And how does what you do here translate into success there? This world, if we were to identify it, so we put dunya, right? This world. This is a place of action. This is the only space that you can do things. When you get to the grave, it's supposed to be a place of rest. But you can't do anything in the grave in that sense, right? Like I can't go offer somebody who lives on the street a blanket in the grave. That's not a place to do that. The day of judgment is just that. It's a place of judgment. It's a place of balancing, hisab. You don't get to go to Allah and say, Ya Allah, can I please go give some food to a homeless person on the day of judgment? And then the hereafter is just eternal existence, right? We are creatures that are created, but we were created for eternal existence. So all of these things become characteristics of these different realms of existence. So essentially what you do here is going to now play a role in how these things end up carrying themselves out. So when you're thinking about success, it doesn't matter fully what everybody else does and says to you and for you. And it's hard. And you have to believe in a God that believes in you more than you believe in yourself. So if you have family that is restrictive, just try your best. If you live in a society that is oppressive, you try your best, right? You have challenges that you struggle with. You just try your best. Allah knows you better than you know yourself. But if you do not make a decision, you go back to the paradox we talked about. When you do not make a choice, you've essentially made a choice. So if you are not choosing to understand what success looks like in terms of future realms of existence, then you've made a choice about it. Does that make sense? You said that, like, I'm choosing to not choose, and then everything's going to translate into, what am I doing professionally in this world? What am I doing in terms of success in this world? But it's going to be seen as an end rather than a means to something. Do you get it? How often do you think about these things in a productive way?
Very few times.
Okay, and why do you think that is?
Because as we've talked about, like, success is like grades, money, career. So I personally haven't thought about it in terms like you put it.
Okay,
I think it's because like everybody around us most of the time is like telling us what success is rather than letting us like understand what success is for us. So maybe that's why.
sure. You're a grown person now, right? And being grown is not like you're of a physical stature, but you have mental faculties and the ability to discern. You can't do something until you do it. So you start to think out, what do these things mean to me? And that's where this list becomes important, because you do it in a healthy, productive environment. Not when some fool is yelling at you, telling you that you're going to be in hell because you do this, this, and that, right? Believe in the creator of heaven and hell. And don't live a life that is in pursuit of heaven or in avoidance of hell. You want to understand that those places can't do anything to you other than what Allah commands them to do. So recognizing who God is, and then being in a space where the tools and information is given to you, it's not a problem. Like you can't go back and rethink yesterday. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. You don't have to belittle it, because that's, again, the tool of this. That, oh my God, I can't believe I'm like this old now and I haven't ever thought about this and that. No, like you don't need to do that mess, right? You're thinking about it now. So you spend some time. Like, what does it look like for me? And then you start to apply it to your decision making, right? Like, this is going to give me 5 minutes of like satisfaction. But what is it going to do for me in terms of my success here? You know? What's it going to do in terms of my success here? Right? Like, what does it, like, I want to drink from the hand of the prophet on the day of judgment. I want to be like in the shade on the day of judgment. How do you do that? And then you think, is it either or? No, it can be both and, right? Be successful. Go be amazing at what you do. Bring real ihsan to it and do it as a source of additional growth. It's going to be hard to think about it holistically if you're just thinking about it through one prism and one part. And that's again like a tool of shaitan. And you don't want to go home and tell your parents, be like, Dad, you're just influenced by the devil, right? No, your dad's going to slap you, and then your dad's going to slap me for telling you things like that. But you want to think about it again in your own terms, in your own prism. Like, what does success look like more broadly? And how do I not fall into something that just because it's a socially accepted thought doesn't mean that it still makes sense fully? You get what I'm saying? Okay. Any questions or thoughts on this or comments? Is everybody good? Are we like in a good spot? Yeah. Okay, great. So we're going to pick up next week. And I had said this a few weeks ago, but I think it's good because what I had said a couple of weeks ago, but then we shifted because the grad students wanted to do something. I wanted to look at the first 10 verses of Surah Al-Mu'minun, and we can like reflect on that. It talks about success. That's essentially what it talks about. And there's 7 characteristics that are rooted in this first 10 verses that are off of this premise, right? قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ, like the believers indeed have succeeded, right? And then it goes to say, what are those characteristics of success? And so we'll just go through it verse by verse. And, you know, we'll do it within the 7:30 to 8:30 time frame. Just so you all know, I think we'll try to pray Isha before as opposed to after, because Hannah's class won't have Maghrib interrupted anymore. Daylight savings time is going to push everything an hour back. So if you can get here by like 7:20, and we'll pray Isha beforehand, unless people would prefer that we pray it after, and then we'll end promptly at 8:30 and pray. But what do you all think? And even if you're not going to be here every week, like what would make more sense? Should we pray before or should we pray after? After?
Preparation. I feel like it would make sense to pray after.
After?
Yeah, after the finish.
Okay, so we'll start at 7:30 and go till 8:30. If you can bring notebooks next time or something to write with, because what we'll do is we'll go through every word in the verses. We'll do it verse by verse. I'll explain like what the grammar is, the etymology of these words, like how it is that it kind of is understood in different tafsir texts. And so there'll be a lot that we can pull out of it, inshallah. You want to be able to write down because you'll just retain more and tell other people to come to, right? We're going to be talking about Quran, which is always a good thing to do. And it becomes one of these kind of spaces potentially of just recentering, right? Is there anything we need to announce? No, you guys have raised, mashallah, $50,000 already, which is really amazing. Yeah, so jazakallah khair. Allah reward you for that. And I think there's still time to raise money, right?
Throughout the week, yeah.
Throughout this week.
I think you sent it out and emailed it.
Did I send it out?
I think in one of your emails you sent the donation.
We sent it to the IC list, but it's in all the WhatsApp groups too and things, you know, so definitely keep letting people know. But that's really amazing. And it's not something you should undermine, right? You want to, with gratitude, recognize like ability God has given to you and to not treat it as something that's just rhetorical, but what you can do when you come together is also amazing. So you start to apply that now to like, what are other things we can do when we come together? You know, can I turn to the people around me and say, hey, like, what can we build together? You know, what can we make happen together so that you're applying like your skill sets, but deepening your bonds on the creations of things that are really great.